The yard went silent. If you're ready to step into a place most people fear even in their nightmares, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and buckle up, because once we enter Pelican Bay, there's no turning back. The first scream echoed through the morning fog like a warning from something ancient. It was just after 5:17 a.m. inside Pelican Bay State Prison, California's most notorious supermax. The Security Housing Unit, the SHU, sat at the center of it all, a concrete labyrinth designed to hold the state's most dangerous inmates in near total isolation. But on this morning, something had shattered the routine silence. Officer Raymond Holt was the first to reach the yard. His boots splashed through cold puddles as he crossed the concrete, still slick from overnight rain. The fog clung to everything: fences, towers, razor wire, forming a gray curtain that made the world feel smaller than it already was. But even with visibility low, he could see it. A body, face down, motionless. He approached slowly, hand on his radio. "Control, I have an inmate down in SHU Yard C. No movement. Request immediate backup." As he crouched beside the body, the sinking feeling in his stomach deepened. The inmate was Marcus Leon, a lifer, known for keeping to himself. Not a gang member, not a troublemaker. A ghost among men. His hands were scraped raw, his knuckles bruised, and there was a dark smear on the ground beneath him. It wasn't blood. It was charcoal, like the kind inmates used to sketch when paper was forbidden. Backup arrived. Officers secured the yard. Cameras were checked, angles reviewed, movements rewound second by second. Nothing. Marcus had stepped into the yard alone at 5 a.m. By 5:14, he was on the ground. But there was something else, something Officer Holt noticed only because the fog had thinned just enough. On the far wall of the yard, etched unevenly into the concrete, was a message. A message no one had seen before. "The quiet doesn't protect you." Detective Sophia Brandt was brought in within the hour. She'd spent the last decade investigating gang-related homicides, prison extortion rings, and suspicious deaths in confinement. Nothing surprised her anymore, or so she thought. The moment she stepped into Pelican Bay, she felt the heaviness. The silence wasn't peace. It was pressure. The warden, Ellis Moore, walked beside her, anxiety hidden beneath his authoritative posture. Leon wasn't in any active conflict, Moore said. No disputes, no threats. He barely spoke. Brandt frowned. People rarely die for no reason in a place like this. Someone saw something. The autopsy came back shockingly fast. No signs of stabbing or strangulation. No lethal injuries. Just a heart that had stopped under severe stress. But the bruising on his hands? Fresh. Violent. Like he'd been fighting someone or something. Brandt returned to the yard. She stared at the carved message. The edges were jagged. Uneven. New. Someone had scratched it into the wall recently, likely with a metal shard or a piece of stone. But Marcus had no access to anything sharp. And if he'd done it, why? Her instincts whispered something she didn't want to admit. Marcus wasn't alone in that yard, no matter what the cameras showed. She visited his cell next. It was small, cold, the kind of place that swallowed sound. His bed was neatly made, the blanket folded precisely. But on the wall, scratched faintly near the corner, she found the same smudges of charcoal she'd seen on the yard floor. And a shape. A symbol. A simple circle with a line cut through the center. "What does this mean?" she murmured. Marcus' cellmate from years earlier, an inmate named DeAndre Bishop Hayes, was brought out for questioning. Bishop was sharp, observant, and no stranger to violence. But the moment Brandt showed him the symbol, his expression shifted. "You found that in Marcus' cell?" Bishop asked, voice low. "Yes," she replied. He leaned forward. "Detective, that's not a drawing. That's a warning." Her pulse quickened. "From who?" "Not who," he corrected. "From where?" "From inside. Pelican Bay has rules. And there are people who believe the walls listen." Brandt stared at him. "Are you saying someone inside the SHU targeted him?" "I'm saying Marcus wasn't crazy," Bishop said. "Whatever he saw, it scared him enough that he tried to leave a message before something got to him." The phrase stuck. whatever he saw. In a supermax built on total isolation, how could an inmate see anything except four concrete walls? But the conversation took a darker turn when Bishop lowered his voice further. Marcus told me once that he heard footsteps at night, he said. Not guards. Not inmates. Something else. Something moving through the vents. Brant rose abruptly. There's no one in the vents. Bishop shrugged. That's what I told him. But he said he'd seen shadows where there shouldn't be shadows. Said he'd heard whispers coming from the old maintenance tunnels. Old tunnels? Brant asked. Bishop nodded. Before the SHU was remodeled, there were access tunnels under the building. Most officers don't even know about them. But Marcus did. She didn't want to believe it. Pelican Bay was one of the most secure prisons in the world. Yet every institution had blind spots, places forgotten, closed off, or ignored. As evening fell, she decided to walk the lower corridors alone. Cameras buzzed overhead. Lights flickered. Each step echoed too loudly. She felt the isolation pressing against her, as if the prison were breathing around her. When she reached the end of the hall, something caught her eye, a faint draft coming from behind a metal storage locker. She pulled the locker away from the wall. Dust scattered. A metal grate sat behind it. Old, rusted, partially open. On the floor just beneath it was a streak of charcoal. Her chest tightened. Marcus had been here. Brant knelt, shining her flashlight into the vent. Wires. Darkness. A faint path of smudges like fingerprints or hand marks trailed along the interior. And farther inside, carved faintly into the dust-coated metal, she saw the same symbol. The circle with a line through it. Someone had crawled through here. Recently. She reached inside with her flashlight, angling the beam deeper. The tunnel stretched farther than it should have, far beyond the SHU blueprints she'd reviewed. It wasn't supposed to exist. Suddenly, her radio crackled violently. Detective Brant, respond. We have a situation in cell block A. She pulled back, breath sharp. What happened? The officer's voice trembled. You need to see this yourself. Brant raced up the corridor, passing guards who looked shaken, pale, unsure. When she reached cell block A, she saw officers gathered around cell A-12. The door was open. The inmate inside, Luis Ortega, sat curled in the corner, rocking back and forth, eyes wide with terror. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't responding. But on the wall above his bunk, written in charcoal, were the same 5 words that were found near Marcus. The quiet doesn't protect you. But this time, there was something else, written below it, in Ortega's trembling handwriting. I saw who took him. Brant's heart pounded. Who? She asked quietly. Ortega looked up slowly, fear swallowing his voice. It wasn't an inmate, he whispered. It was someone who wasn't supposed to be here. He pointed toward the air vent. And they're coming back tonight. The storm hit Crescent City just after midnight. Rain slammed against the windows of Pelican Bay State Prison like an angry fist, but inside the administrative segregation unit, the air was eerily still. Officers spoke in low tones, radios crackling, boots echoing down cold, concrete hallways. Something had shifted in the facility, something dangerous. Lieutenant Carson knew it the moment he entered Corridor C. 2 guards were posted at the end of the hallway, pale, sweating, and visibly shaken. What happened? Carson demanded. One guard swallowed hard. Sir, the surveillance feed from cell 212 froze at 22:07 hours. We thought it was a routine glitch. But when the backup feed kicked in, he hesitated. Torres was gone. Carson stopped cold. Gone? You mean transferred?
No.
I mean gone. The cell was empty, sir. No signs of forced exit. Nothing touched. He just wasn't there. The name Torres carried weight in Pelican Bay. An inmate with no affiliations, no visitors, no known enemies, and no recorded violent incidents. Too quiet. Too controlled. A ghost among men who shouted to be heard. But Carson remembered the autopsy photos from the body found in Crescent City, clean cuts, surgical precision, symbolic markings. The same killer they feared might be hiding inside Pelican Bay. And Torres matched one unsettling detail in the case file. He had been a licensed surgical assistant before his conviction. Carson's stomach twisted. Lock down the wing. No one in, no one out. As alarms blared, the prison snapped into motion like a machine awakening from sleep. Steel doors slammed shut. Officers rushed through corridors. The smell of disinfectant mixed with sweat and tension. But for investigator Jenna Lowe, the lockdown was confirmation. Torres wasn't a missing inmate. He was a suspect. She had been building a quiet file on Torres ever since the body surfaced near the docks. The wounds were too perfect for a street killing. Whoever did it knew anatomy, understood how to end life without leaving chaos. And Torres, with his surgical past and uncanny silence, stood out like a dark stain on a white wall. Now he had vanished from the most secure unit in California. Jenna arrived at cell 212 minutes later. The door stood sealed. No damage. No manipulation. The inside was untouched, bedding folded with military precision, personal items aligned perfectly on the shelf, untouched meal tray still warm. Carson folded his arms. Looks staged. It is staged, Jenna said quietly. Torres didn't run. Someone moved him.
Who?
In this place, nothing happens without 5 signatures. She looked him in the eyes. Unless someone erased the signatures. Carson stiffened. Someone inside the prison. Someone with access. Someone with authority. Before they could continue, Officer Hale came jogging down the hallway. Lieutenant, you need to see this. They followed him to the control room. The power had flickered earlier due to the storm, causing a few minutes of camera downtime. But it wasn't the outage that mattered. It was what happened afterward. A security operator paused the footage and zoomed into camera 47, showing a shadowed figure entering the hallway near Corridor C. The image was low resolution, but Jenna saw something unmistakable. A uniform. Not an inmate. A guard. A guard who had no reason to be near cell 212 at that hour. Who is that? Carson snapped. The operator shook his head. We can't tell. The ID badge is turned away from the lens. Jenna stepped closer. Freeze it right there. Something caught her attention. A slight limp. The mysterious guard favored his left leg. Carson's eyes widened. That looks like Officer Marin. He injured that leg during the yard riot last year. Where is he now? Jenna asked. Scheduled for night duty in the mess hall. But when they called the mess hall, no one had seen him. The room fell silent. Torres wasn't missing. Marin was missing. And now there was a clear connection between them. It didn't make sense. Marin was a decorated officer, known for being strict but fair. No disciplinary issues. No debt. No suspicious behavior. He was the last person anyone would expect to be involved in anything criminal. Unless someone forced him. Jenna remained deadly calm. Check Marin's last 48 hours. Every duty log, every access swipe, every interaction. Carson nodded to his team. Get on it. Minutes later, new information started pouring in, and it wasn't good. Marin had been off camera for several 20-minute intervals across the past 2 nights. Not usual. Not accidental. And then came the discovery that turned the investigation upside down. Officer Marin's locker was open. Inside were his personal effects, wallet, car keys, family photos, neatly stacked as if left behind deliberately. But there was one item missing, his service pistol. In a maximum security prison, a missing weapon was a crisis. But combined with a missing officer and a vanished inmate, it spelled something worse. Someone was preparing for a confrontation. Jenna's pulse quickened. I want a full sweep of the facility. Maintenance tunnels, storm drains, utility shafts. Torres didn't escape the prison. They're still here. As the storm raged outside, the search began. Teams moved through the underbelly of Pelican Bay, echoing tunnels, dripping pipes, long-forgotten service routes used decades ago. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The smell of mold and stagnant water clung to the walls. But in a narrow hallway near the old electrical wing, Officer Harris shouted, "Lieutenant, we found something." The beam of a flashlight illuminated a trail of footprints in watery dirt. 2 sets. One heavy, one lighter. Torres and Marin. But the trail didn't lead out. It led inward, toward an abandoned isolation chamber sealed years earlier. Jenna's voice dropped to a whisper. Why would they go in there? Carson's jaw clenched. To hide? No, Jenna said. To finish something. They reached the door, rusted over but partially pried open. The metal groaned as officers forced it wider. Inside was darkness. Cold. Silent. But something else was waiting there, something that froze every officer in place. A chair. Straps. Dried blood. And on the floor, a notebook belonging to Officer Marin. Carson picked it up and read the first line, and his face drained of color. Jenna leaned closer. The words were shaky, rushed, and terrifying. Torres said it's not over. He said the last body wasn't the beginning, it was a message. Jenna felt her stomach drop. A message for who? A message for what? Before she could speak, Harris pointed to the far corner of the room. Lieutenant, there's another door. A smaller door. Locked from the inside. Jenna felt the air turn colder. Whatever was behind that door was still alive. And waiting. The small metal door at the back of the abandoned isolation chamber was so out of place, it felt like a secret the prison wanted buried. Rusted bolts clung to the frame, and faint scratch marks lined the paint, like someone had clawed at it long ago. The storm outside hammered the rooftop, but inside, the silence grew so deep it felt like the building was holding its breath. Lieutenant Carson signaled his team to step back as Jenna low knelt beside the door. Her flashlight beam slid across the lock mechanism. It wasn't old. It wasn't damaged. It was secured from the inside. Torres is in there, she whispered. Carson nodded grimly. Or what's left of Marin. The team braced as Carson gave the order. On my mark. 3 officers stepped forward, the battering ram positioned against the metal. 1, 2, 3. The door snapped inward with a deafening crack. The room beyond was small, cold, and almost completely dark except for a single flickering emergency bulb hanging from exposed wires. Water dripped steadily from somewhere in the ceiling. And in the center of the room, strapped to a bolted-down restraint chair, was Officer Marin. His head hung forward, his uniform soaked with sweat, his wrists bound so tightly the skin had swollen around the straps. But he was alive. Barely. Jenna rushed to him. Marin, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. When he finally managed a breath, it came out as a rasp. He's here. Where? Jenna demanded. Marin's trembling gaze shifted toward the shadows. He said you'd come. Carson swept the room with his flashlight, jaw clenched. Torres, step out where we can see you. The beam landed on the far wall, an open maintenance shaft barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. A faint metallic clang echoed from within, followed by footsteps retreating down the tunnel. Move, Carson shouted. The chase that followed was unlike anything Pelican Bay had seen. Officers barreled into the shaft, flashlights bouncing wildly as they crawled into the suffocating darkness. The tunnel walls were slick with condensation, the air humid and stale. Every sound echoed, drips of water, scraping boots, and somewhere ahead, the steady, controlled breathing of a man who wasn't running. A man who was leading them. Jenna kept moving. He's guiding us. This isn't an escape. Carson looked back at her. Then what is it? A path, she said. He wants us to see something. Minutes later, the tunnel widened into a deeper maintenance corridor beneath the prison. Old pipes hissed with steam. Rusted tools and abandoned machines lined the walkway. The place had been unused for years, forgotten under layers of bureaucracy. But Torres hadn't forgotten it. Footprints in the dust showed someone had been walking down here regularly, carefully, deliberately. The footprints ended at a heavy steel door marked restricted, utility access only. Carson tried the handle. Unlocked. That alone was wrong. When the door swung open, Jenna felt a chill rise up her spine. Inside the room was a makeshift workspace, clean, organized, and impossible. No inmate could gather this without help. It was lit by a battery-powered lamp. Tools lay arranged on a metal table: precision knives, forceps, medical clamps. Anatomy sketches lined the wall along with photographs of the victim found in Crescent City. He had recreated the crime scene. Carson exhaled slowly. He's been working down here for months. Jenna stepped closer, scanning the notes pinned above the table. Each sheet was meticulous: measurements, incision depths, organ diagrams. But one page stood out. It read, "The final cut requires an audience." Before she could process it, a voice echoed from somewhere in the room.
Calm.
Measured.
Close.
You came faster than I expected. Every officer spun, weapons drawn. Torres stepped out from behind a column. But he didn't run.
Didn't fight.
He walked forward slowly, hands lifted, eyes cold as stone. Jenna faced him. "Why Marin? Why lure us here?" Torres smiled faintly. "He wasn't the target. None of you were." Carson stepped forward. "Then who?" "You'll understand soon," Torres said. "But for now, you're in the wrong room." Before anyone could react, a deep, mechanical thud echoed from the hallway. The steel door behind them slammed shut. Locks engaged. Carson raced toward it, pulling hard. "It's locked from the outside." Officers pushed, rammed, kicked, but nothing. Torres exhaled softly. "I never wanted to hurt anyone inside this facility. Not the staff. Not the inmates. My work isn't about chaos." Jenna's voice hardened. "Then what is it about?" Torres's eyes turned almost mournful. "Correction." Jenna realized what was happening. "You're not just a killer. You're making a statement." Torres nodded once. "The justice system rewards brutality. But precision? Intent? It fears that." His expression sharpened. "And it fears truth even more." Carson grabbed him by the collar. "What truth?" Torres leaned forward, whispering like a teacher explaining a simple fact. "The killer you're hunting isn't me." Silence slammed into the room. Jenna shook her head. "You expect us to believe that? You recreated the crime scene. The surgical incisions." Torres cut her off. "I studied them. Carefully. Because the technique wasn't mine." Carson's eyes narrowed. "Then why disappear? Why kidnap Marin?" Torres's jaw tightened with suppressed urgency. "Because Marin was next." Jenna froze. "Next as in the next victim?" Torres nodded. "The killer sent him a message. A warning. I found it before Marin did." Carson stepped back. "What kind of message?" Torres nodded toward the table. "Bottom drawer." Jenna approached cautiously and pulled it open. Inside was a sealed envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it. One photograph. Officer Marin tied to the same restraint chair they had just found him in. The timestamp on the photo was from 3 weeks earlier. Marin had been targeted long before Torres vanished. Jenna felt horror wash over her. This wasn't Torres's plan. "No," Torres said. "I took Marin to keep him alive. But now that you're here," a clicking sound echoed in the corridor beyond the steel door. Jenna turned toward it. "What was that?" Torres's face darkened. "You're about to meet the real man you're chasing." The lights flickered. The temperature dropped. Footsteps approached from the hall, slow, deliberate, confident. Jenna's heart hammered. Carson lifted his weapon. The shadow grew larger. And then, the steel door began to unlock from the outside. One bolt, then another, then another. The final lock clicked. The door swung open. And the figure standing there was someone Jenna recognized instantly. Someone who was supposed to be safe. Someone who should never have been a suspect. Her voice came out as a whisper of disbelief. "Warden Briggs." He smiled coldly. "Welcome to the truth." And the door slammed shut behind him. If you thought this was intense, the next story will blow your mind. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.